Stop looking at where you are for a second. Instead, look at where you are playing from. Because money doesn't reward kindness, and it certainly doesn't reward effort. Money rewards the level of consciousness from which you operate. And although nobody will say this to your face, there are 6 silent strata that determine your economic destiny. These aren't social classes, they are psychological operating systems, an invisible hierarchy where the weak survive and the astute ascend. You clicked on this because you suspect a glitch in the matrix. You feel that friction, the frustration of giving more to the world than you receive back. Today, I'm going to deconstruct exactly which level you are moving in and how to escape the gravitational pull that keeps you poor. There comes a point in life where you stop believing that money is just a tool and you start to understand that it is actually a language, a silent dialect that a select few master while the majority just stutter without understanding why they are never heard. But before I dissect the 6 levels of money, I need to take you to the basement, to the foundation that no financial guru dares to show you, the Machiavellian understanding of how economic power operates on the human will. If you ignore this, you can memorize every level, but you will still act like a subject, repeating formulas without ever wearing the crown. The most common cognitive bias of the modern man is the just world hypothesis, the belief that money responds to logic or fairness. You believe that if you do this, you will receive that if you work hard enough, you will be rewarded. That is the favorite illusion of those who hold control. It is a narrative designed for compliance. An individual who believes in the natural justice of effort is easy to manipulate. They work harder, complain less, and accept their position as if it were divine will. But you are not here to repeat that role. You are here to pierce the veil and look at the naked structure of the game. The first thing you must internalize is that money does not move toward the good, nor the prepared, nor the deserving. Money moves toward those who know how to direct it, attract it, manipulate it, and bend it to their will. That is the uncomfortable truth. The world belongs to those who understand the hidden mechanics behind accumulation, not to those waiting to be discovered for their talent. I know this idea triggers cognitive dissonance. You've been conditioned to measure your value by your sacrifice, not by your strategic capacity. But that is precisely why you are stagnant, because you are playing with morality in a game that requires intelligence. The 6 levels of money do not define your value as a human being. They define your relationship with power. Each level you advance doesn't make you a better person. It makes you freer. It turns you into someone who no longer depends on external permission to survive. And that independence is the quality most feared by any system, because a man who does not depend does not obey, and a man who does not obey cannot be controlled. Most people will never pass the first level, not for a lack of capability, but for a lack of vision. Before I reveal the first level, you must understand the logic that supports the entire structure. Money is a reflection of the place from which you operate psychologically. It is not the amount you possess that matters, but the way you relate to it. There are those who have little, yet act from a mindset so sharp, so disciplined, so calculated, that they inevitably ascend. And there are others who have much, but move with a mental fragility so evident that sooner or later, their empire collapses. The level is not determined by the bank account, but by the degree of consciousness, discipline, and internal power with which you position yourself in front of the market. Let me take you to a point that nobody explains. Every human being has a perception of money that is inherited, imposed, or adopted without question. This perception, more than any salary or niche, determines your economic fate. You cannot escape the level you operate in until you identify it with brutal honesty. If you deceive yourself, if you convince yourself it's not that bad, you will keep moving in circles, believing you are advancing, when in reality, you are tethered to an invisible rope. The majority live in a state of permanent necessity, not necessarily physical necessity, but psychological necessity. They need the money to arrive. They need something to change. They need the external world to hand them an opportunity. But that need is precisely the shackle that prevents them from ascending. Where there is need, there is dependence. And where there is dependence, there is weakness. The Machiavellian rule is clear. Never negotiate from a place of necessity. He who needs loses. This principle applies to money with surgical precision. This brings us to level 1, survival. Here, there is no strategy, no vision, no planning. There is only urgency. From a neuroscientific perspective, the individual at this level is operating almost entirely out of the amygdala, the brain's fear center. They work to cover the month, not to build a future. They take decisions based on cortisol spikes, on pressure, on the constant sensation that everything could collapse at any moment. They do not manage money. Money manages them. They live trapped in a psychological cycle of scarcity, where every expense hurts and every income is insufficient. Even if they are capable, even if they have talent, their cognitive bandwidth is so consumed by the immediate now that they cannot see beyond the next invoice. This is tunnel vision induced by stress. But here comes the trap. Many people believe they are in a higher level because they earn a little more, because they don't lack food, or because they can afford the occasional luxury. However, they continue to operate from the same psychological vibration of survival. They still depend entirely on the next paycheck. They still have zero control over their economy. They are still subjects of the system, not strategists within it. You must ask yourself with absolute honesty, do you make economic decisions from vision or from fear? Do you manage your money with intention, or do you merely react to entropy? Do you have control, or are you just trying to keep your head above water every month? The answer to these questions determines, with surgical precision, if you are still in the lowest level of all. And if you are, do not feel shame. The majority of the world lives there. But what differentiates you is that you are listening to this with the will to exit. There is a crucial point you must understand. To ascend to the next level, you do not need to earn more money immediately. You need to think differently. You need to break the neural association between money and fear, between income and survival, between work and obligation. The one who ascends is not the one who earns the most, but the one who structures their mind to stop being a slave to urgency. Because when urgency dominates, any movement is a defense mechanism. And from a defensive position, you cannot build power, only resistance. The second level of money, which we are entering now, begins the moment you manage to break the mental state of survival and shift to operating from a place of predictable stability. But to arrive here, you must first confront the most painful Machiavellian principle. No one is coming to rescue you. No one will adjust your income out of pity. No one will hand you opportunities out of charity. The world does not rotate in favor of those who wait. It rotates in favor of those who seize control of themselves. This is why this initial transition is the most uncomfortable, yet the most necessary. Because if you do not recognize the level you are in, everything that follows will be useless knowledge. The truth is simple. Either you dominate your relationship with money, or money will forever be the master dictating your life. There is no third option, and you are not here to be a vassal. You are here to learn to move like a prince who understands the board, not like a pawn who only awaits orders. Now that you have grasped the foundation and stared level 1 in the face, you are ready to advance. Here, you will discover how the psychological transition operates the chasm that separates the one who survives from the one who begins to construct real power. Level 2. Stability. This level is not reached by earning more. It is reached by waking up. The majority believe that escaping survival is simply having a stable income, a fixed routine, and a certain sensation of control. But that is not awakening. That is merely anesthetizing yourself. The true leap occurs when you start viewing the economy as a system that can be manipulated in your favor, and not as a monster you must dodge every month. And this, although it seems like a subtlety, is the psychological frontier that separates the debtor from the architect of power. To understand the magnitude of this shift, I need you to observe something very few analyze. Survival is a reactive state. Stability, in contrast, is a predictive state. In the first level, you are responding to entropy, to what the world throws at you. In the second, you begin to anticipate. You start to read patterns, detect cycles, and understand that money does not appear chaotically, but under rules that, if interpreted correctly, grant you an asymmetric advantage. This is the moment you start breathing for the first time without feeling that time is crushing you. But be careful not to deceive yourself. Stability is not wealth. It is a neutral point. It is firm ground from which you can build or upon which you can fall asleep forever. There are people who reach this point and remain trapped for decades, victims of the status quo bias, believing that a fixed salary, paid bills, and a small monthly margin is the maximum they can aspire to. They do not risk, they do not investigate, they do not take decisions that amplify their influence. Stability becomes a ceiling, a pleasant, comfortable, warm ceiling, but a ceiling nonetheless. And a man who lives under a ceiling he did not build with his ambition, but with his fear, will never be the owner of his destiny. You are not here to accept ceilings. You are here to shatter them. That is why I speak of the second level with brutal honesty, not so you settle when you reach it, but so you use it as a platform to launch yourself upward. The second level does not reward audacity. It rewards mental organization. Here, you do not build empires, but you do build habits. You are not multiplying your money yet, but you begin to retain it. You do not take massive risks, but you learn to avoid fatal errors. And that knowledge, though it may not seem like it, is more valuable than any income increase. Observe this phenomenon. A person in survival mode can earn 3,000 euros a month and still live drowning in anxiety. Another in stability can earn 1,200 euros and never feel in danger. It is not about figures, it is about clarity. The one living in survival believes they need more. The one living in stability understands they need order. This is the first great psychological shift that liberates you from fear. You no longer depend on chance. You depend on your criteria. You no longer wait for miracles. You structure your system. You no longer run after money. You begin to direct it. But there is something even more critical. In this level, you discover your true cost, not what the market pays you, but what you are worth internally. Because when urgency disappears, sincerity emerges. You are no longer making decisions with an invisible gun pointed at your head. You no longer accept any deal just to survive. You no longer beg for opportunities. You can pause long enough to ask yourself, am I selling my time below its true value? And that question, if answered with honesty, becomes dynamite for your entire old system. Stability allows you to see that a large part of your poverty was not economic, but mental. You were poor because you needed too much, because you conceded too much, because you accepted too little. But when the hunger disappears, so does the docility. You start to think with more coldness, more precision, and more intention. You start noticing that money doesn't escape through the salary, but through the weaknesses of your behavior. Impulsive spending, driven by dopamine hits, lack of planning, zero strategy, borrowed desires, external expectations. Upon seeing this, something in you breaks, but it is a necessary fracture. The fracture of self-deception. Many believe that the second level is economic, but in reality, it is emotional regulation. Here, you learn not to react, but to observe, not to run, but to analyze, not to scream, but to calculate. And that coldness, that mental distance, a stoic detachment, turns you into someone who no longer crumbles before a surprise, an unexpected expense, or a difficult month. You begin to recognize that it was never money you lacked, but the internal structure to handle it without trembling. Stability is the first reflection of discipline, and without discipline, no higher level is attainable. But here appears an uncomfortable truth. Stability is a level that can become your prison, because once the fear calms down, the human brain tends to cling to safety. This is evolutionarily normal. After living months or years in tension, the last thing the amygdala wants is to return to chaos. This level whispers to you, stay here. It is enough. You are fine. You don't need more. And that whisper is the most dangerous voice for a man who wants to build power, because comfort anesthetizes more than suffering. Many never pass the second level because they confuse comfort with success. They convince themselves that having life sorted out is sufficient, but the price they pay is high. Their spirit goes numb, their ambition withers, and their internal force weakens. And a man without ambition does not ascend, he dilutes. Machiavelli knew this well. He who prefers comfort to risk will never govern. He will only be governed. Therefore, if you are in the second level, I ask you, are you ordering your life to grow, or only so you don't fall? That is the difference between the one who stays and the one who ascends. The one who stays only wants security. The one who ascends wants power. You decide which one you belong to. The transition toward the third level is produced when, from stability, you begin to generate surplus. Not just money that is left over, but capital that you can direct with strategic intention. This surplus is not a coincidence. It is the result of mastering your impulses, hacking your own behavioral patterns, and adjusting your conduct so that every economic movement responds to a real plan. Here, you begin to create distance between yourself and the mass, because while they are still fighting to reach the end of the month, you have already achieved something they cannot even imagine. Margin of maneuver. The margin of maneuver is the beginning of liberty. It is the mental and economic space that separates those who react from those who decide. With it, you can save, invest, test, negotiate, reject offers, seek alternatives. You can start acting like someone who has options, not like someone begging for them. Here emerges the germ of real economic power, the capacity to say no. He who can refuse with calm possesses the advantage over he who can only accept. But surplus is not enough to climb to the third level. You need something deeper. Vision. In the second level, you learn to organize your life. In the third, you learn to direct it toward a destiny. Not to survive, not to maintain, not to stabilize, but to advance with clarity. You stop seeing money as something that comes and goes, and you begin to see it as a resource that must be deployed in strategic positions to multiply. Money stops being an end and becomes an instrument. And when you achieve that, the game changes completely, because it is in this level where the first real metamorphosis occurs. You pass from being someone who protects their stability to someone who builds power. You do not spend without purpose. You do not accept just any proposal. You do not squander energy on the irrelevant. Your movements become more elegant, sharper, more calculated. You begin to see the whole board, and you understand that money is just a piece. The important thing is how you move it. Most people never experience this transformation because it demands something few are willing to surrender. Renouncing the mindset of the worker and adopting the mindset of the strategist. It doesn't matter what your job or current situation is. This shift does not happen outside, but inside. The strategist thinks in long horizons, in cumulative consequences, in recursive patterns. The worker thinks in terms of the month. And while the worker contents himself with stability, the strategist uses it as a weapon. That is why the third level is the most dangerous. Here you discover that you were always capable of more than you believed, that your limits were not real, but inherited narratives, that your potential was not asleep, but chained. And that revelation is so powerful, it can either propel you or terrify you. Because once you see it, you can no longer look at your life with the same eyes. You can no longer blame the system, fate, the government, or the boss. You discover that you are the one determining your ascent. And if you reach this point, then you are ready to understand what the third level of money truly consists of. Level 3. The surplus and strategic direction. The third level of money is the point where the majority believes it's fine, but where the distance truly begins between those who aspire to power and those who only seek comfort. Here, it is not about how much you earn, but about how much real control you possess over your own economic structure. It is the level of strategic surplus, but also the level where you must have brutal clarity about who you are, what you want, and what you are willing to sacrifice. And when I speak of sacrifice, I do not refer to hours of work. I refer to old identities, customs, habits, internal narratives, because in this level, what you must leave behind is not your money, but your former version. In the third level, the surplus that was previously just money left over becomes capital with purpose. You no longer save out of fear. You save to act. You no longer hoard to tranquilize your mind. You hoard to move the board. At this point, the relationship with money becomes sophisticated. Every dollar has a function, every expense an intention, every decision a consequence. Your accounts stop being a passive record and transform into a map of your internal discipline. You can look at your financial movements and discover exactly who you are, but the truly Machiavellian aspect of this level is not the money itself, but the type of person you are becoming. In the previous levels, you were someone who reacted. Here, you are someone who calculates. Urgencies no longer destabilize you. Now, wasted opportunities bother you. You no longer look to get paid more. You look to make your money work. You are no longer interested in impressing anyone. You are interested in understanding why the majority will never have what they crave. And the more you understand, the less you want to belong to that mental herd. In the third level, a dangerous emotion appears for the first time. Conscious ambition. That sensation that you can advance further, that there is something great waiting for you if you dare to move with precision. Ambition for the ignorant is a luxury. For the strategist, it is a responsibility. Because now that you have discovered your capacity to generate surplus, you know you have no excuses to keep living like someone who just wants to not fall. You have the obligation to grow, the obligation to leave behind the role of the stable survivor, to become the architect of your own wealth. This level demands a subtle but determinate transformation, passing from thinking in short horizons to thinking in long horizons. The majority makes decisions based on days or weeks. Those who ascend make decisions based on years. And if this seems exaggerated, it is because you are still clinging to the worker's mindset, the one that only wants to reach the end of the month without problems. In the third level, you no longer live in the month. You live on the path. Your objective is not to arrive well. It is to advance toward a place where economic ease stops being a privilege and becomes the baseline. But to advance toward the fourth level, you must master a principle that separates the mediocre from the ascending. The capacity to direct surplus toward positions that generate return. Common people save money to spend it later. Strategic people save money to multiply it. That difference is the first symptom of power thinking. And although it seems simple, it represents a massive psychological rupture. You stop seeing money as a finite resource and begin to see it as a force that can expand. Here appears the most important figure in your economic evolution, the cold decision maker. At this point, you begin to evaluate your options not by emotion, but by impact. Questions you never asked yourself before become essential. What return does this offer me? What is the real risk? What do I lose if I don't act? What do I gain if I wait? What version of myself does this decision demand? Little by little, you start to notice that the majority makes economic decisions as if they were emotional bets, not calculated movements, impulsive purchases, investments without analysis, spending to fill personal voids, all symptoms of minds that will never ascend beyond level 2. You can no longer live like that, not after having arrived here. In the third level, you do not make decisions to feel good today. You take them to be impossible to knock down tomorrow. And this, although it sounds simple, requires surgical discipline. You have to police your own impulses, your weaknesses, your automatic narratives, because here you will discover that your greatest enemy was never the money, but your emotional relationship with it. The man who controls his impulses controls his wealth. The one who doesn't loses even when he wins. Now, the third level doesn't just demand discipline, it demands strategic vision. Here, you must answer a question very few dare to confront. Where do I want to take my economic life? The survivor doesn't think about this. The stable person doesn't either. But you can no longer ignore it because surplus without direction evaporates. Ambition without a plan disperses. Capacity without purpose is wasted. This level forces you to draw the map of your financial destiny with intention and precision. You cannot ascend without direction. And here comes the most Machiavellian point. In the third level, you begin to see the economy as a game of influence. It is no longer just about money. It is about how your economic position affects your freedom, your time, your decisions, and above all, your personal power. You begin to understand why those who dominate this game never reveal the whole truth. Why do they teach hard work instead of strategy? Why do they glorify sacrifice instead of mental coldness? Because he who controls his surplus controls his life, and he who controls his life needs to obey no one. This level awakens a new way of seeing others. You start to distinguish between those who act from need, those who act from stability, and those who are, like you, starting to act from strategy. You discover patterns, identify others' weaknesses, perceive opportunities that were previously invisible to you. You no longer operate from the fear of failure. You operate from the curiosity for advantage. And that mindset inevitably separates you from the bulk of the world, but it also exposes you to a powerful truth. This level is a transition, not a destination. Here, you are not rich yet, but you are not poor. You are not unstable, but you are not complete. You are not a beginner, but you are not a master. You are on the border, and the border is a dangerous place. You can advance toward power or retreat toward comfort. Here is where it is decided who truly has the will to ascend. The problem is that the majority abandons right here, not because they cannot advance, but because advancing implies renouncing the life they built to feel safe. It implies accepting that the next leap is not taken from comfort, but from firm ambition. The third level offers you the first real test. Are you willing to change your system of life to scale to the next level? Or will you settle for an improved version of the stability you already have? And here appears the crucial question. What separates the one who ascends to the fourth level from the one trapped in the third? The answer is simple, but nobody wants to hear it. The capacity to put your money in motion. The third level teaches you to handle your surplus. The fourth demands that you multiply it. But that leap is not economic. It is psychological. Because to multiply, you must accept calculated risk. You must tolerate uncertainty. You must trust your criteria more than apparent security. The people who stay in the third level are those who say things like, "Better keep it safe. Now is not the time. I don't want to risk what I've achieved." It is a logical mindset, prudent, and completely incompatible with ascent, because power does not grow in safe terrain. It grows in terrain where decisions are made with advantage, not fear. The fourth level does not reward precaution. It rewards strategy. That is why the third level is the quietest level, the most internal, the most decisive. Here, you start molding yourself as someone who no longer lives conditioned by money, but as someone who is starting to condition it. You discover you can alter your environment, your opportunities, your results. And when that happens, you no longer think like someone who wants to survive or be okay. You think like someone who wants control. And when someone wants control, they inevitably head toward the fourth level. Level 4, expansion and multiplication. The fourth level of money is the point where the board stops being a place you simply observe and becomes a field where you start moving pieces that others don't even know exist. Here, you are no longer a spectator of the economic game. You are an active player, someone who makes decisions with intention and understands that growth does not happen by accident, but by the intelligent placement of resources. In this level, money stops being something you save and becomes something you direct. It stops being something you protect and becomes something you use as a weapon. For many, this level is unattainable because it demands the definitive renunciation of the stability mindset. The third gave you comfort. This one demands movement. The third gave you internal control. This one demands external control. The third allowed you to breathe. The fourth forces you to expand. And expansion, although necessary, always generates vertigo. That is why the majority retreats, because advancing implies facing a reality that strips you bare. In the fourth level, you can no longer take refuge in excuses, nor in fear, nor in false securities. If you fail, it is because of your decisions. If you advance, it is too. This level has a simple rule. Money that does not move dies. It can die by inflation, by fear, by indecision, or by emotional stagnation, but it dies all the same. A static euro loses power. A multiplied euro gains it. And you can no longer afford to operate as a guardian of small amounts. You need to think like someone who manages capital, even if you don't have it in gigantic quantities yet, because the thought precedes the economic level. Nobody arrives at the fourth level acting like someone from the third. You arrive when you start thinking like someone who knows that moving money is mandatory, not optional. Here appears the mindset that distinguishes the ascending from the rest. Strategic investment thinking. The majority confuses investment with impulsive buying, with risk without analysis, with emotional bets disguised as opportunity. But you cannot move like that. In this level, every investment is a play, not a desperate attempt to multiply by intuition. You must analyze return, risk, time, impact, liquidity, sustainability. You must ask yourself not only how much you will gain, but what control you will gain. Because in truth, the fourth level is not the level of money. It is the level of influence. Influence is born when your money starts to produce without you being present. And that is the point that terrifies the average mindset, because it implies accepting that your time is no longer your only source of income. In the lower levels, time is the currency. In level 3, surplus is the currency. In level 4, the currency is the system you build around your money. It is a radical shift. You do not work for money. You make money work for you. And although this phrase is burned out on social media, very few understand the psychological cost of implementing it. To make money work for you, you must release the control you thought you had. You must take a step into the unknown. Place your resources in places where you cannot control every variable, where you must trust your analysis, your vision, and your capacity to withstand uncertainty. And this is the test that separates the one who ascends from the one trapped in comfort. The capacity to withstand the discomfort of growth, because growth is always uncomfortable. Multiplication always demands breaking something. Routines, beliefs, patterns, even relationships. In this fourth level, you are forced to face a fact that many evade. Wealth is not built in an emotionally neutral environment. It grows in environments where you must make decisions that make the world around you uncomfortable. Perhaps you must invest while others spend on leisure. Perhaps you must silence your plans to avoid criticism that only comes from small minds. Perhaps you must leave behind people who love stability and will never comprehend your ambition. But do not be confused. It is not arrogance. It is necessity. A prince who wants to govern does not ask permission from those who fear his ascent. In the fourth level, the duality between fear and ambition intensifies. You are no longer in survival, no longer in stability, no longer in surplus. You are on the edge of power, and that edge is sharp. It can elevate you if you advance with precision, or it can cut you if you move with emotionality. That is why the mindset here must be surgical. You cannot rush. You cannot act out of anxiety. You cannot confuse movement with progression. Every step must be measured. Every decision must respond to a mental model. Every investment must bring you closer to a larger scheme. Here is where you first understand that money is an army, and you are its commander. You cannot send your soldiers to fight without strategy. You cannot leave them standing still while others expand their territories. You must direct them toward positions where the return is greater than the risk assumed. That is the essence of the fourth level. Directing, not accumulating. But you must know something deeper. Multiplication does not occur because you have money. It occurs because you develop a mental system that allows you to use it with vision. The poor look at risk as a threat. The strategists look at it as a cost. The poor see investment as a bet. The strategists see it as an equation. The poor flee from movement. The strategists generate it. And you are already crossing that frontier, even if you don't notice it completely yet. In this level, you become conscious of the different vehicles you can utilize: businesses, assets, investments in strategic education, tools that amplify your capacity, relationships that generate opportunities, structures that allow you to leverage yourself. But the true vehicle is not external. It is internal. Your criteria, because you can enter 1,000 opportunities, But if you don't know how to evaluate them, you will become easy prey. In this level, your criteria is worth more than your capital because it is the criteria that determines what you do with it. Here, you also discover a brutal truth. The world is full of opportunities disguised as traps, and traps disguised as opportunities. Your task is to distinguish them. This demands two qualities: patience and coldness. Patience not to rush out of anxiety to grow fast. Coldness to act without asking for validation, without seeking applause, without needing approval. In the fourth level, nobody applauds you when you make big decisions. They call you crazy. The weak will never understand the movement of the strategist, but you must be prepared to withstand the misunderstanding. Machiavelli said it. The man who seeks power must accept that he will be criticized by those who will never dare to attempt what he does. When you start moving your money, many will tell you it is risky, that you should be prudent, that you should settle. But they speak from the level they occupy, not from the level to which you are heading. Their words do not describe your reality, they describe their fear. And here we face one of the most important principles of the fourth level. Multiplication demands psychological isolation. Not emotional or social isolation, but isolation from noise, from pressure, from outside opinions. Because at this point, your progress will not depend on what the world believes about you, but on what you believe about your own capacities. You must be able to act even when your environment doesn't understand your logic. You must be able to sustain a vision that only you see. You must trust your capacity for analysis, even when results take time to appear. Multiplication is not immediate, nor is it linear. It requires strategic patience. It requires withstanding periods where it seems nothing is advancing, even though in reality you are building an internal structure that will later explode into growth. In this level, you must learn to differentiate between fast results and important results. What is fast usually excites. What is important transforms. But the fourth level is not just analysis, investment, and multiplication. There is a more Machiavellian aspect you must understand. In this level, you start to control your time, because while your money moves, you are no longer obligated to move at the same rhythm. You are the one who decides. And that freedom is the first real symptom that you are approaching a level of personal power that the majority never experiences. However, this initial freedom is also dangerous. Many arrive at the fourth level and get confused, relaxing too soon. They believe they are already at the top and start committing the errors of the first level, but with more money. They spend without analysis, trust the wrong people, become arrogant, lose the discipline that brought them here, and thus, they fall, not because multiplication doesn't work, but because their ego grows faster than their criteria. Therefore, the fourth level demands strategic humility, not submissive humility, but the humility of the warrior who knows the battle is not over, that he has not yet reached the final territory, that there is still distance to cover. That humility keeps you attentive, keeps you precise, keeps you awake. He who loses humility loses vision, and he who loses vision loses money. Here also appears something that will be uncomfortable for you. In the fourth level, you must say goodbye to the identity that sought security, because security does not exist at this point. What exists is control. Control does not mean the absence of risk, but dominion over how you interpret and handle that risk. When you understand this, your growth stops depending on external circumstances and starts depending exclusively on your internal system. And when your internal system becomes solid, when you master your impulses, when you think in long horizons, when you use surplus to position yourself, when you multiply with intention, then the door to the fifth level opens. The level where you no longer build wealth, you build power. Level 5, influence and the invisible architect. Arriving at the fifth level of money is understanding that wealth no longer has anything to do with money. What you are about to learn is not taught in any finance book, nor in motivational courses, nor in entrepreneurship talks. Because here, it is no longer about how much you have, but about how much you influence. The fifth level is the territory where money stops being the goal and becomes the collateral effect of the power structure you built. Here, you discover that a man with vision can generate more wealth with one decision than others with a decade of work. This level demands breaking completely the player mindset. In the fourth level, you move the pieces. In the fifth, you design the board. You no longer react to opportunities. You create them. You no longer seek to multiply money. You seek to create systems that multiply without your presence. And that is the difference between the rich and the powerful. The rich works for his money. The powerful makes others work for his system. But understanding this requires seeing the world with a different lens. Until now, your decisions were centered on advancing, on growing, on multiplying. Here, the focus shifts. You no longer seek to advance. You seek to expand. You no longer seek to grow. You seek to govern. And governing demands a mindset that not everyone is prepared to sustain. The mindset of the invisible architect. The invisible architect is the one who controls without exhibiting himself, who directs without showing himself, who influences without pronouncing his name. It is the man whose presence is felt even when he is not there. That is the fifth level, the level of discrete power, the level where you discover that true authority is not in saying what you do, but in making the world react to what you decide. At this point, your sources of income no longer depend on your time, nor your force, nor your energy. They depend on structures, systems, relationships, assets, strategic decisions that operate independently of you. The man who ascends to this level has broken the last psychological chain. He no longer perceives himself as an individual who must work to produce, but as an entity that designs mechanisms that produce for him. And here appears something deeply Machiavellian. The fifth level is not just economic, it is social. Money here flows as a consequence of the position you occupy. People look for you, not you for them. Opportunities chase you because your criteria validates them, not because you need them to arrive. You are a reference point, a node of influence, a magnet, and this, although it seems glamorous, demands an internal fortitude that very few can sustain. Because if in the fourth level you battled against your fear, in the fifth you battle against your ego. And although fear paralyzes, ego destroys. Many people who ascend quickly become corrupt here. They believe they have reached the summit, that they no longer need to learn, that they can no longer fall. That thought is cancer. It is the root of decline. It is what differentiates the amateur from the true strategist. The amateur celebrates too soon. The strategist knows the game never ends. In the fifth level, you are no longer governed by results. You are governed by vision, and vision demands constant maintenance. Here you discover that power is not a place you arrive at, but a state you must sustain. It requires discipline, precision, discretion, elegance, coldness. It requires knowing when to advance and when to wait. It requires understanding that every decision has an impact not only on your results, but on the perceptions of those around you. And when you master this, the door opens to the highest level of all, level 6, total sovereignty and self-mastery. The sixth level of money is the level very few know, the level almost nobody consciously recognizes, but whose existence defines the most durable wealth in the world. The sixth level is the level of dominion, not of money, not of the system, not of the environment, but the dominion of yourself. Here, money becomes irrelevant because it no longer dictates your decisions. It no longer impresses you. It no longer conditions you. It no longer intimidates you. You have seen its nature, its movement, its fragility, its power, and above all, you have understood that money does not make the man. It is the man who grants meaning to the money. In this level, your relationship with wealth transcends the material. Wealth becomes identity, not arrogant identity, but strategic identity. You no longer define yourself by how much you have, but by what you are capable of building from any point. If tomorrow you lost all your capital, you could rebuild it. Not because you have money, but because you have yourself. Because you possess the skills, the vision, the mindset, the coldness, and the internal structure to generate advantage even in the worst circumstances. The sixth level is the point where you realize that true wealth is not in the bank account, but in the capacity to generate wealth infinitely. And that capacity does not come from money. It comes from emotional, mental, and strategic dominion over yourself. Here, your time is no longer for sale. Your energy is no longer wasted. Your decisions no longer respond to impulses, but to pure vision. You stop consuming anything that does not elevate you. You stop surrounding yourself with people who do not accompany you in your ascent. You stop wanting to prove something to someone. You no longer compete. You select. You no longer insist. You choose. You no longer chase. You attract. Because the man of the 6th level has understood something that the rest of the world will never understand. Money is a reflection, not of your luck, nor of your education, nor of your family. It is a reflection of your internal power. In this level, your movements are slow, precise, intentional. You do not need validation from the exterior. You do not seek recognition. Your influence does not depend on your physical presence, but on the structure you left in the world. And your economic system no longer sustains itself on your work, but on your past decisions, on your alliances, on your investments, on your legacy, because that is the final secret. The 5th level gives you power. The 6th level gives you legacy. And a legacy is not money. A legacy is a way of thinking that is transmitted without effort, a structure that keeps functioning even when you are no longer there, an identity so solid that nothing can knock it down, an impact that transforms your life and that of those who depend on you, not by obligation, but by leadership. The 6th level is not for everyone, not because it is difficult, but because it demands a level of internal responsibility that the majority fears to assume. Here, you can no longer blame anyone. You cannot hide. You cannot victimize yourself. It is you facing your own greatness. And greatness, although powerful, demands silence, focus, and discipline. You have ascended from survival to dominion, from fear to control, from reaction to strategy, from desire to vision. And now you understand what very few understand. Money does not make you free. Internal freedom is what makes money obey. When you reach the 6th level, you no longer ask yourself what level you are in. You ask yourself what level the world is in compared to you. And that is the question that distinguishes the one who rises from the one who stays on the ground.